Alright, say you just wrapped up development on one of the hardest projects in your life. 3 years and non-stop 40+ hour work weeks for a game that had over 1,000 members of staff, all doing their absolute best in order to bring about a product that they believed in. But forget that, it's about time we talked about Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. Like all of the design choices in Generation 9 that are looking good and bad, and why there's absolutely no reason that these games need to exist.
Check me out, y'all.
We've had a new generation of Pokemon every 3 years since Black and White, where each project undergoes a development cycle that has had roughly 1 year of pre-production and 2 of in-engine development. In between those, we have another bundle of games that help prop up yearly releases and are either based off of games that already exist, games that existed a little longer ago, and some outliers that we'll get to in a bit. That feel like a lot of information? Well, good. Because if it wasn't obvious enough, Game Freak is stretched extremely thin, and Pokemon Scarlet and Violet are just the newest in a line of entries to the series that make this business model appear continually more unstable. Developer crunch and overwork is absolutely an issue for Pokemon, and besides having detrimental effects on the people that work on the games themselves, it's a series that has consistently lacked polish and features that future entries are always scrambling to catch up with. I really thought we were going somewhere after the announcement of smaller scale DLC to replace the typical B-Team third versions, constant recruitment of younger talent which has led to some of the most influential people at the company, and outsourcing to other developers entirely for main series games. Yes, I'm still making the BDSP video, it's just gonna be a while. I have a lot to say. But despite releasing the most well-received Pokemon game in the last decade back in January, we've had about a month to let it breathe until the marketing machine kicked into high gear, and gave us a new region, a set of 3 starters, and likely a director that's shown time and time again that he struggles greatly under the threat of a ticking clock. Shigeru Omori has never stopped working since he was given the reins of the series shortly after X and Y. He's one hell of a director for being able to release completed games that crumbled under an intense development period for a series with such a massive scope. And judging from the publicly leaked prototypes of Sword and Shield in particular, it's pretty insane what amount of work his teams can do in just a couple of months. By the way, I gotta dispel this notion that the games are specifically being forced out of the gate because of the anime, card game, or even particular people, when this just isn't the case. This series is so big and has so many moving parts to the point where it's never one sole reason, just a bunch of factors that combine to cause this type of situation. If you really think that it's the anime that's dictating the games because of a graphic you've seen online, then why was Game Freak granted a massive delay on Gold and Silver, despite Pokemon being at the height of its popularity during its development, to the point where the entire project might as well have started from scratch? The anime in particular has introduced multiple exclusive arcs to bend to the games, not the other way around. And honestly, the 2019 series can produce endless amounts of episodes until a new generation given how it's structured. I think Legends also having separate areas instead of a full open world could allow for a couple of new ones spread throughout the year as DLC. Something that seems more than possible given how quickly the Daybreak update was pushed out by Iwao's team. Why not attempt to leverage the guys over at Ilka to shift manpower towards an actually functional game as a secondary developer for main Pokemon games that are already out and could use even more content, which would give Game Freak significantly more time to polish Generation 9? Besides that, this constant need to release games in the series leads to a complete uncertainty from the perspective of a consumer. We just got a game that revolutionized Pokemon interaction, completely rethought how the most basic series mechanics were understood, and gave people an experience unlike anything we'd seen for the series. With Gen 9 being planned and subsequently developed for 2 years at this point, how much of Legends DNA is going to make it in? There's no way that they have the time between now and release to uproot fundamental aspects of Scarlet and Violet to make it more in line with what people love from Legends. So the most that we can hope for is that scraps of its design managed to make the cut. Sword and Shield had this exact issue with Overworld Pokemon. According to Omori, the team worked hard to ensure that they made it into Generation 8 after seeing the positive response to Let's Go. But realistically, that gave them just under a year to effectively re-implement how the player interacts with the main mechanic of the game. The level design wasn't made to accommodate this type of gameplay, leading to big empty spaces in the routes that would have originally been wild grass. And the nuances that Let's Go brought with the mechanic, like size differences and visible shiny Pokemon, didn't survive the transfer process. Part of me kinda wants to go back and see what a more densely designed Sword and Shield might have looked like if the game wasn't forcibly built around overworld Pokemon in the last 9 months. And I'm extremely concerned that the multitasking overworld or ride Pokemon from Legends are going to fall by the wayside in Scarlet and Violet, or at best are just going to lack the finer detail that it offered in those departments. At the very least, it seems like we've fully done away with the immersion-shattering pocket dimensions from Sword and Shield, which stopped feeling pretty necessary the moment we got into a system with a little bit more horsepower. Seeing the series all on one page is so satisfying after years of experimentation, which is something that I can also say for the fact that the entire game is now open world. I will say I'm a little worried about crowbarring the traditional battle system onto a setting where you can walk up to the 7th gym from the beginning, which is something that Legends got away with by designing the core systems around the open world and not being done the other way. Hopefully they end up doing that. Scarlet and Violet show a lot of promise as new generation Pokemon games that promise a truly open world. But much of the game's potential is up in the air because of strict deadlines, a likely director that has struggled under those deadlines, and a myriad of features that the series is stumbling to catch up on. The fact of the matter is that the games are getting bigger, but the time to make them remains the same. And judging from the way this game also looks, I'd say that we're in desperate need of some more time in the oven. Before I talk about specifics when it comes to how Scarlet and Violet is looking, I think it's worth talking about the general art style outside of that, especially since the last time I did that I got a lot of views. Each of the Generation 9 starters showcase a fundamentally good understanding of what went wrong with previous trios, and harken back to a design ethos that felt long since abandoned when it came to starter Pokemon. When comparing 8 to 9, it finally feels like we're past the era of starters designed as characters first and creatures second, which really does wonders for making these Pokemon seem like they can exist in this world. Cinderace and Inteleon especially suffer because of this. Being based off of footballers and secret agents as their defining character traits, I refuse to believe that these apparently natural-born creatures can exist in the wild, when their major character traits are influenced by the existence of humanity to the degree of being what is effectively their entire design. It's basically a lot of words to say that they're pretty unnatural looking at their core, and the warning signs were there way back in the first trailer. For previous sets of starters, you typically had an animal that corresponded to a particular type, and that was really it. Generation 8 introduced a creature with a type with a defining personality attached to it, a character trait that took precedence, and as those lines evolved, became the centerpiece of the design. If you tried to graft those character traits onto any other starter trio, Gen 9 included, it'd be incredibly forced since they just simply weren't designed for that. So if there's a Sonic the Hedgehog design attached to any of these three, they're buried deep within. Besides feeling like animals that could just exist in the wild, there's also a lot of merit on keeping these creatures less human as they evolve, because Pokemon is a game about being a human living alongside these interesting creatures. When those creatures become more humanoid, that goal starts to muddy a little bit, and they start becoming less like partners and more like people with the attributes of animals, which raises a lot of questions. And listen, I know, Mr. Mime and Hitmonchan have always existed, but they were never your first and intended to be a beloved cornerstone of your team. It's less of the fact that a Pokemon is standing on 2 legs, because lots of Pokemon do that just fine, and more so that a personality is being shoved onto a Pokemon that as a kid I'd rather have projected or made up the personalities of instead. Another big departure from the series art style, though I'd argue not for the better, would be these identical doll-like protagonist designs. The series always succeeded by having a fantasy world that you grounded yourself in, and less so one that the games wanted you to relate to because you were also probably a kid going to school. Not to say that a series with a school setting and a young audience of mine can't work, because it absolutely can. But with those, the general premise and character design do a lot of the heavy lifting, something that these real departures from the Pokemon series art style don't do very well. As an adult looking back, even the earliest designs felt contemporary and were emblematic of the series at the time. God, they're so good. Ken Sugimori's original art style was reminiscent of popular artists at the time, but his designs themselves were always appropriately Pokemon. The designs never felt like they were lacking when it came to inspiration, being just fantasy enough to look a bit too goofy in real life, but grounded enough to the point where they fit a semblance of real-world aesthetic that kids could identify with. And in time, the series maintained that growth and literally matured the character designs until they got around to remaking that original game. This then set the standard for protagonist character design going forward, and as the series progressed, so did design sensibilities. Whilst the legs and arms grew a lot longer, the bags, hats, and other accessories grew to match, which all came together to create a ton of exaggerated designs that cast a pretty wide net of appeal. I can relate to the main characters of Sword and Shield in the same way as a person that's both far older or younger than I am, which is a really cool thing that even Pokemon's pretty limited customizability helps out with. It's one hell of a feat to pull off for a series so huge, and it's why these significantly younger designs with a clear focus on lacking that broad appeal are a little worrying. The idea that designers are paid to design kids for kids to play as is something that Pokemon has historically avoided, by evoking a sense of cool to the designs even if they're not super grounded in reality, not nearly as much as these new designs are. Even the classic eye shape set in the mid-2000s has been replaced with a rounder variant, and departing from that classic Pokemon art style will make them feel more generic above all else. I wouldn't care as much if customization was less scattershot, but this is Pokemon we're talking about, aka if you pick the guide design or care for having more than 4 skin tones, then you're shit out of luck. Though I'd be pleasantly surprised if Game Freak could prove me wrong on that front. It's only been, what, 10 years? Besides the models looking all waxy and really poorly constructed, these designs simply aren't consistent with the rest of the series, and are likely extremely telling of how the rest of the characters in Scarlet and Violet are also gonna look. Like, we're witnessing the birth of an adjustment to what is a really consistent art style, and like it or not, it's super fascinating to see. What I don't understand is why Pokemon fans are so adverse to people talking about changes to character design, good or bad, because it doesn't matter. People are paid thousands to do exactly this. And if you're the one dying on a hill saying that nobody should put thought into this or that it doesn't matter, then congrats. You're only doing a disservice to the people that you think you're shielding from criticism. It's just so strange to me. Although I'm not too stoked about the potential of Scarlet and Violet's character designs, I will say that Game Freak have evolved the general aesthetic of the series when compared to Sword and Shield, so we better get into what those changes are. Generation 8 tried to go with a more realistic approach to world design for its art direction when compared to the games that came prior, which had a lot of weird inconsistencies when taken as part of a full product. Galar itself looks alright, but there was a clear mismatch with the models that had textures designed for the 3DS's more cel-shaded approach, as well as the new direction for the series following Let's Go, which is still the most consistent looking Pokemon game since the jump to HD. As much as it hurts me to say that we're no longer going down the path those games set given how classically Sugimori they look, Game Freak seem to have taken a lot of cues from new Pokemon Snap and have retextured lots of Pokemon models to offer more realistic depth. Now they blend in with the world far more than the original textures that made each Pokemon look like super smooth balloon animals in Gen 8. Each model also seems to continue the trend set by Legends Arceus that turned many details that were originally textures into indents on that Pokemon's model, such as mouths, eyes, and other appendages. You could say that it's a pretty minor thing, but even Stonejourner, yeah, that thing, now looks less like its features are plastered on like stickers, and it goes a long way to improving that design. I just wish they were a bit more consistent. Seviper has these cool looking scales on its body, but Pikachu is still this amorphous blob of cheese. I don't think it's a good idea to fix one art style inconsistency by what is effectively creating another. What I can't say the same for is the environment quality. I don't know what's going on with Game Freak's texture compression, but I swear it's worse than Legends Arceus, which had entire character outfits reduced to literal blurs. It's something I can fix on my own when the game comes out, but that really shouldn't be the basis of considering whether something looks good or not. Any strong art style can't really survive being poorly executed, though what I assume is the starting house shows a lot of promise. It looks both gorgeous in isolation and also real cohesive with the surrounding area, and all the colors really pop. Feels like we're a far cry away from Sword and Shield's pretty unappealing looking first trailer by comparison. The only issue is that when Sword and Shield looked good, it was because it had the added benefit of a fixed camera. These new towns and cities now have to be designed with a rotatable camera in mind, which means the trailer close-ups like these are under scrutiny because that's what the game can look like in motion. Games are absolutely subject to change visually as time goes on, but there are so many issues in this one city alone that I don't know where to even begin. Huge frame drops in the Swablu scene, entire shadows missing from whole structures, which gives the look that this world has no correct sense of lighting. The textures on this back wall, floor, or railing suffering from absolutely atrocious compression. I'm extremely skeptical of this area in particular because it appears to be a major hub for the game. Legends had a similar issue with Jubilife, but I was willing to give that game a chance as it lacked any sort of NPCs in the initial trailer, and it's something that I was confident would be built upon over time. If these are the areas that Game Freak is choosing to focus on for their first trailer, I can't help but be worried for how this game is going to look. They're pervasive issues that every single game in the series since Sword and Shield has suffered from, and the common denominator here is that the time taken to create these areas is too little. It's easy for me to be excited for a new Pokemon generation because I see 3 cute new starters and a world to explore with all my old favorites, and I smile because it's everything I've come to love from this series. But there's always a little asterisk associated with a new game release because I know for a fact that the vision these developers are going for ends up getting completely bottlenecked by a time crunch, and from a director that has a lot of almost amazing games. Imagine Oras, but that extra year was given to the Battle Frontier, which was absolutely planned to be in the game at some point. What about Sun and Moon that had all of its trials fully featured, proper attention given to the Ultra Beasts post-game instead of Fetch Quest, and all of Ultra Sun and Moon's follow-up ideas and concepts in one cohesive package? Or how about a Sword and Shield that came packaged with the DLC content as part of the core game on day one? A Sword and Shield with a fully featured Pokedex that had the time to be balanced, tested, and implemented. And a Sword and Shield that had the time taken to refine the finer details that we're just now following up on in Scarlet and Violet. After the breath of fresh air that was Legends, it's clear that the studio doesn't lack ideas or talent or new faces, but instead the time to let them make the games that they very clearly want to make. Absorb support studios as part of the core brand instead of porting them off to repackaged games that they clearly didn't understand the appeal of. And most importantly, give this guy a break. Nobody at this company is some misunderstood visionary, but they are human beings that struggle under a series that's collapsing in on itself. And I think of all people, they're the ones that want to prevent that from happening the most.